Good afternoon, Los Angeles. The pain in our city and across this country right now is real. And for everyone who is watching this who feels in pain, I want you to know I am too. For everybody who feels the hurt and everybody who feels this moment, I want you to know that I hurt too. And that each one of us across this great city and this nation have a moment of common ground. A feeling we all feel having seen what happened in Minneapolis, and a moment to move forward together to create a better city and a better nation for everyone. Our conscience demands that we translate our pain into passionate calls for justice, that we speak the truth and act to end the racism that took the life of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and too many others. Not just in past history books, but today, where we live in America, to acknowledge the faults that we all carry collectively in the culture and the institutions that surround us. We feel a righteous rage, and we have to express it. But the rage must not consume us. It must not be turned back on us. We know that it is only with peace that progress can follow. We must not allow any who feast off of chaos, who hunger for division, who want to replace peaceful protest with images of a nation coming apart. We must not let them win. Let's be clear. Black Lives Matter and allies from across this city and region organized powerful protests in a beautiful park yesterday. And no one should point a finger in the direction of people who are exercising their First Amendment rights at a moment when we need our voices more than ever. As long as I'm mayor, myself, these chiefs, our entire city leadership is committed to protecting those rights. Those rights are most important in bad moments, not just good ones, when we must give voice to outrage, not just to moments of happiness. And we are committed to the peaceful and safe expression of those rights. And we must continue to do, even in these most difficult days, to support peaceful protest and steps that our nation faces in the days ahead to go beyond protest towards progress. But as the sun set in our beautiful city last night, we saw some of the ugliest images in a generation. Acts on our streets that were not demonstrations for justice, destruction and looting that came from a small group of individuals, but they have not just caused chaos and damage. They are hijacking a moment and a movement and changing the conversation. We have police officers who worked all night last night and the night before, who are away from their families, protecting people and businesses they don't know the names of. They put their lives on the line. Some of them have been injured. This isn't new to them, though. Our guardians put themselves out there bravely every single day to save a woman trapped in domestic violence, a teenager who's been trafficked into sex trade, somebody who's been a victim of sexual violence in our city, processing, being the detectives, making sure that justice is served in our city every single day. They mentor young people. They reflect the demographics of our city. And no, none of us are perfect, we're human beings. But they are trained and continuously trained to make sure that we have a model that is about de-escalating, about looking at our own bias, about partnerships for peace with people that didn't exist in this city decades ago. We need to contain that fact. But in the same city, we need to contain another fact that I don't believe is a contradiction. We have young people in our city who feel that they don't get a fair start in life, that the system is racist and rigged against them, that whether it's their schools, whether it's their family income, whether it's their health, that they start many yards behind the starting line, and that racism and rigged feeling infects also our criminal justice system in its culture and its practice. But for a moment, even those two groups on both sides of the line found common ground. It looks like this. Out there right now, we've got everyone from everyday citizens who are protesting to business owners to good cops and firefighters upset and grieving about the injustice we all saw as Americans first. We saw it in Minneapolis, and we've seen it too often. This is a moment to find and to hold that common ground, and I am committed to doing that. But against that shared pain, and behind badges, in our homes and in our streets, we all clearly saw something that had nothing to do with justice. We saw people in our city smashing windows, stealing, and beating. We are bigger than that, and I know we are better than that. The us peacefully speaking out sometimes doesn't have as loud a voice as the images that make the news. A small number of people who seek to exploit our pain in order to commit crime. And as I see these criminal acts take hold and take attention away from the real challenge behind us, I think about the suffering already in our city, the businesses that we're hoping to reopen that have been so badly beaten down by COVID-19, businesses that had a fighting chance and could have welcomed customers back this weekend but are now closed, damaged, and looted. But just as we have during this COVID-19 crisis, we will support those small businesses. My promise to them is that you are the bedrock of our economy, and I'm committed to cleaning up our streets as we've been doing each day, to giving assistance to the small businesses who feel as shattered as their window fronts, to the employees who need a paycheck and now wonder if that is gone, and those who need to lead our recovery economically from this pandemic. It breaks my heart, too, to think about the Angelenos protesting in peace and fighting for justice, how this violence and looting clouds that picture. Those who celebrate the pictures are the ones who seek to divide us, to make sure we can't find common ground. I think about parents in different neighborhoods worried about whether their children can play outside or whether they can take a walk around the block. And it is my core responsibility to make sure I do everything in my power to keep our streets clean and just, to make sure that we have our communities safe and fair. It's not an either or. And violence is never the answer to violence, even if it's thousands of miles away. If we were watching closely yesterday, we saw that Angeleno spirit in action in Pan Pacific Park, people demonstrating with nonviolence and strength. We saw images of officers on the line exercising restraint we expect of them. But we also saw people burning vehicles, jumping on buses. We saw tactics that all of us need to make sure restore the peace and find the common ground. As I've said, we know that there are those among the peaceful demonstrators who are not interested in peace. Their interest is in chaos, not calm, destruction, not justice. And we know that there are always, in any system, accountability that whether you're an officer with a badge or an everyday citizen, that you need to be held accountable to. And it's my promise that that will always be our city. So we have to tap now into every resource that is available to protect our city. That is the job at hand today. And I want to give you a few updates on some of our steps and decisions in the past 24 hours to do just that. When times demand it, strong steps are required to bring peace back to our city, which is why I enacted, as heavy a decision as it was, a citywide curfew. I gained some strength from mayors across the city who I talked to, from Atlanta to Seattle, from Denver to Cincinnati, in Louisville, and of course Minneapolis, who said, when the innocent start to be the victims, when lives begin to be lost, our first responsibility always is, so that we can find progress and justice, to restore calm and peace to our streets. The goal here is to keep all Angelenos safe And please help do that. We all have to own that ourselves, to give law enforcement and firefighters the space they need to keep the peace. And so we will keep this curfew in place this evening, the same hours from 8 p.m. and lasting through 5:30, covering every part of Los Angeles. But on top of that, wherever emergencies arise, we ask our partners across the state for assistance. We provide aid to each other, just as we send firefighters for fires over our borders. Those same cities and places send us help, including from the state. And in that spirit, we received and thank the additional support that came from law enforcement agencies elsewhere in the state: Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Ventura, and Kings counties. And in the early evening last night, I spoke with Governor Gavin Newsom to provide him with an update on what was happening here in Los Angeles. I described the situation. I explained how it had become clear that a small group had turned a nonviolent gathering into acts of violence and criminal acts against our local businesses. He offered to declare a state of emergency and send in and supplement National Guardsmen and women, everyday citizens who put on a uniform that could come here to help us. And I said yes. We've declared states of emergency for fires and earthquakes. We're in one now for COVID-19. My heart breaks that we had to declare one because some people, some of them from outside of our communities, started fires and threw rocks and other dangerous items. People who drove from across town in caravans, in cars to jump out, to loot, get back in the car, and do it again. That's the worst of us, and that's clearly an emergency. After this declaration, my office coordinated with the state's Office of Emergency Services on our deployment of our 500 National Guardsmen and women, and another 500 that have headed here, I know, to back up the Sheriff's Department. All of these steps are not to instill fear. They're not to exact punishment on anyone. The chief can speak more to the role that they will play. They will not be deployed in South Bureau. They will be in places where we are sensitive to what the community feel was from 1992. And they will do their job to protect those places that still aren't secured because of the looting that has existed here downtown and elsewhere in our city. And I also want to be very, very clear that ICE is no part of this. There's rumors out there. They are not part of these efforts. This is not some excuse to conduct immigration raids. These are folks that are under the command of our Governor, Gavin Newsom, not our U.S. military. These actions are intended to protect our neighbors, our local businesses, our houses of worship, our streets, our neighborhoods, to help back up our peace officers and to help them deal with the immediate issues at hand and to try to respond to calls and perform their normal duties, because crime doesn't stop just because this is going on. In a similar vein, I recognize that there was some concern about why the COVID-19 sites were closed at about 3 p.m., 2 hours earlier than they usually do yesterday. Sunday's always our day off. There would have not been any tests today, no matter what. But that wasn't a decision where we just closed them from the government, and some have even said to punish people. Hardly. These are volunteers, and volunteers themselves said that they didn't feel safe and they wanted to leave, and that made that we had to shut them down a couple of hours early. As you know, Los Angeles was the first major city to not only give free testing, but free testing to everyone in every community, whether they had symptoms or not. And our testing operation is very heroically led by our fire chief, Ralph Terrazas, whose men and women have just done an extraordinary job side by side with those women. Because the volunteers who staff these centers still do not feel safe coming back to them, some of them will remain closed tomorrow. But I will have my staff and my team, together with our fire department, make sure that we keep our largest one open at Dodger Stadium. Our mega testing site with the capacity to do 6,000 tests will be open tomorrow, as well as our walk-up location in South Los Angeles, which is critically important, at the Kedron Community Health Center. And everyone with an appointment for tomorrow can still be accommodated right now. New appointments may be pushed to Tuesday or Wednesday, but keep testing yourself. And as I've always said each night, you know probably the website as well as me. It's coronavirus.lacity.org/testing to schedule. And I encourage all residents to get tested. I've talked about how COVID-19 feeds off of the racism that we see. I'm proud that since we saw the numbers of how African Americans in Los Angeles were disproportionately dying above the numbers in the population, we've cut that disparity in half, and we're not going to rest until we cut it in half again. At the request of LAPD, we also had to make a tough choice yesterday to shut down service on our Dash buses and to deploy Los Angeles Department of Transportation teams to the Fairfax district to impound burned out cars and help with immediate response. Dash service has been restored downtown, and all Dash routes will be restored in the next hour. So if you need those buses, they are here to serve you. And in consultation with Metro Board Chair Mayor James Butts from the mayor of Inglewood and my friend, Metro suspended all transit service at 8 p.m. last night. It was not an easy decision given the challenge of balancing safety and maintaining that lifeline for so many people. Metro suspended its service out of utmost concern for the public and its employees and the damage that they saw to their bus yesterday. And I joined Metro in apologizing to riders who were stranded last night. Metro will reimburse people for verified trip costs. You can call 323-GO-METRO or email customerrelations@metro.net for more information. And I want to note that regular Sunday service resumed this morning at 5:30. Metrolink and Amtrak services to Union Station continued throughout the night. And finally, in response to events on Friday and last night, our street services and sanitation crews have been deployed with preparation and cleanup related to these protests, to clean up our city, to make sure that we can restore this city of angels. So far, over the last 3 days, more than 300 members of the city workforce have spread out primarily downtown and mid-city to clear debris, to clean up from fires, remove bulky items from our roads and sidewalks. We've mobilized street sweepers, sanitation trucks, graffiti abatement teams, and our departments will never stop working for you, even in the toughest of times. No matter what happens, core city services continue. Your right to protest is a sacred American right. Our humanity demands that we protect the space to feel tomorrow, the next day, the day after that. And our spirit will need even more space for it to heal our hearts and our streets. Today is a new day, and we're looking at it through the eyes, I hope, of young people. They saw parts of their city on fire. They heard the helicopters and sirens outside their bedroom windows. Some of them were on the front lines of the demonstration crying out for justice. Others were probably just at home crying and scared. That healing that we can find, that common ground that we can model, the security that we must maintain for them is how they will walk into their future, in peace and with love, and with the strength to build the bridges that our country needs them to construct. These bridges torn down by discrimination, or maybe never built because of the evils that have been with us since this country's founding. Because of them, hate and violence have no place in our destiny, no place in our future, and we will not stand for either of them here in Los Angeles. Because of their passion and their persistence, we can learn the lessons of our own city's history and lead in this ongoing struggle. I hope maybe later today and in coming days to talk about how we can take those next steps forward. That gets lost in the fog of these moments, and new generations that haven't recognized what activists have achieved in changing the way we look at public safety, the investments we make in higher wages and more housing, the way we take human services as importantly as we take public safety, and how we can continue to make those investments together and listen to the demands when people say it's not just about a criminal justice system, it's about equality in this country and how we find it together. We can do this only when we reclaim the safety and peace of our streets. That is job one, so that we can get back to the more important job of building a free, fair, safe, and just city and country for all of us. Strength and love, Los Angeles. And with that, let me turn it over to our Chief of Police, Mike Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon, Los Angeles. I want to give a brief situation description of yesterday and then talk about today and the path forward. Yesterday began and I put some publications out as as an opportunity for a new day. It followed a night of violence in which we saw destruction in the downtown business core. We saw rocks and bottles and officers injured. We saw valiantry, and we saw destruction. We saw a community that had already been impacted and devastated by the impacts of this coronavirus, this pandemic, that were hit again, now with the matters of not just demonstrations that escalated into civil disobedience, but that escalated into violence. But yesterday was an opportunity for us to restart. And we saw protest activities that we were supportive of, that we would facilitate. Two primary ones, both in the East LA portion of the Hollenbeck area, as well as at Pan Pacific Park. And as those protests went on and our officers maintained an awareness and a facilitation of those, unfortunately we saw those escalate into violence. The one I'm happy to say, the one in East LA, in the Hollenbeck area, was facilitated without any acts of vandalism or violence. But Pan Pacific Park, the aftermath of that was quite different. As the crowds left that location and moved across the area and eventually to Fairfax and Beverly, and the groups that were there, many of them participants earlier in a very peaceful and well-organized demonstration and expression, it escalated into violence. Not just the capture or surrounding of an MTA bus, to climbing on top of that, endangering both those individuals as well as the immediate public. But that turned into a firestorm of that bus and its destruction. As officers responded to attempt to regain control and protect those people that were inside and at risk, we saw further acts of violence against officers with rocks and bottles and other projectiles. We saw vehicles that were then burned and destroyed. As officers responded and further contained additional resources and to disperse those groups, we also saw acts of officers interacting with those communities that gave me concern. And as I was personally on scene and responded there and to gather what was occurring, we made every effort to continue to de-escalate the situation. And I want to take a moment and say that when I stood on Beverly Boulevard, west of Fairfax, hours after the initial destruction, I saw opportunities within the protesters that were willing and able to have a conversation. That moment, while it was followed by hours after of continued expressions of violence and loss of hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage, in devastation to business owners and lives that will last potentially for generations. But that moment and moments that we saw over the course of last night, there were opportunities between police and protesters, people who were not involved in the violence, but were caught up in that moment, for us to de-escalate and to find an ability to hear each other for a moment. And that's what encourages me today. The organization last night, this department, Chief Terrazas, his men and women of the fire department, we resorted to tactics and strategies and resources to restore order and to maintain it. The fires that occurred, the violence that occurred, the looting that occurred had the potential of continuing to escalate into today, into the midst of which we have seen in our past. But those controls and those efforts and that valor and the energy of our people as first responders and first protectors made that difference. And to the men and women in public safety, as Chief of Police of Los Angeles Police Department, and I know on behalf of this mayor and all of the government of Los Angeles, we are grateful. What you do each day is this was the element of your heart, a demonstration of your values. And despite the injuries, despite the attacks, and at times vile and obscene remarks, terrible things said, and then augmented by acts of violence, you held your ground of your character. Wasn't perfect. Our actions will never be. But our commitment to this community is to do our very best. And I am proud of the work that I've seen. Over the course of the night, we're able to disperse a lot of individuals that were bent on further destruction. At that same time, as the organization has been responding to this emergency in these circumstances, we also worked with Mayor Garcetti and his team to work with the state to take further measures to ensure that we would not be satisfied with this continued escalation of this civil unrest. What we saw Wednesday night increased on Thursday. And as I said yesterday, it increased on Friday, and we looked forward to Saturday being a different day, but instead of that, we saw it exponentially increase. We saw no fires on Wednesday. We saw little property damage on Thursday, a little more increase. By Friday, both those circumstances changed. We began to see our first fires, and we certainly saw a tremendous amount of property damage and then looting. And then yesterday, exponentially, it increased yet again. And that's where I'm proud of the mayor's efforts in the state of California, our local law enforcement partners, Sheriff Villanueva, our fellow law enforcement, that we worked with strategies that we know are harsh and are strong, but are necessary to our primary mission, which is the safety of Los Angeles. And that was to restore order, to do so constitutionally, to do so according to the law, and do so in respect of everyone and their rights, and to do so in a manner that is just. As we did that, we began planning and added, I supported the efforts of an establishment of curfew, so that actions of people who are bent on lawlessness could be better identified and understood, and our officers, our finite resources, could focus on that. That effort last night versus the night before allowed us to make just under 400 arrests, many of which were involved in efforts of looting businesses that were left vulnerable by the damage that they had incurred. We saw efforts on Friday night of looting that were primarily individuals on foot. On Saturday night, that transitioned to vehicles, caravans, individuals that were moving from location to location in an effort to loot those businesses. The curfew allowed us and gave us an additional authority to stop those, investigate, and hold those individuals accountable. And that, I believe, was helpful, made a powerful difference in curtailing further acts of looting and loss to these businesses. Secondly, recognizing the finite number of the Los Angeles Police Department and its membership of some 13,000 in a city of 4 million, we mobilized our entire organization in a matter that has not happened in more than 30 years. But this morning allows me to more than double my workforce. Our ability of men and women, sworn members of the organization, to be seen. And to Los Angeles, I will tell you that our efforts are to be seen and to hear you, to see you, and to engage with you. Not in an enforcement posture, but to reassure you that we have better days ahead and that we will maintain order. The last matter was the issue of the calling of the National Guard. It is within the public safety framework, whether it be a fire, flood, or other natural disaster, man-made or otherwise, to rely upon the State National Guard as a resource for public safety. And it's a heavy decision because we recognize the symbolism or the idea of a military uniform. But as the mayor indicated, these are men and women that live in our communities. They're accountants, they're bookkeepers, they're bankers, they're construction people, and they're Angelenos. And today, their resources will come and are already in Los Angeles, and their assignment will allow our officers to engage in Los Angeles, engage in our public safety efforts, and free us from the responsibilities of holding on and ensuring the safety of businesses that have been broken into and are damaged and vulnerable. Last night, they arrived within hours of the request, extraordinary response, and interrupted individuals who were bent on further victimizing businesses that had been damaged and looted. That interruption has set a tone that will help us move forward in restoring peace and and recovering from this terrible spasm of violence. Today, this morning, we wake up with an added workforce of men and women who will be out in the streets working foot beats, talking with businesses, visiting houses of worship, engaging Los Angeles to reassure, to hear and listen to your concerns, and to be committed in a partnership as we work our way out of this disaster. The National Guard, I've met with their leadership. We'll continue with them to monitor them. We'll be stationed on foot at locations. They will not be patrolling the streets of Los Angeles. They'll not be in sectors in a sense of moving along blocks. They'll be at individual businesses to safeguard those businesses. They'll be in communications with us and us with them, and they'll be here as long as are needed to ensure that those locations are safe and to allow the department to work on other pressing emergencies for public safety. It's my hope and prayer that their tenure here is short, as is theirs. The curfew, as the mayor indicated, will continue tonight. We have protests scheduled for today. It is my every hope and belief that we can facilitate and ensure that those protests occur, regardless of their size, whether it's 100 people or 100,000. I have stood in this city and see 500,000 people in a demonstration on a weekend day with less than 100 officers, without any property damage, without any violence. People have asked me about controlling this and bringing additional officers to do that. The control of this is a part of what we have the capability of doing, but it is not the entire mechanism. In fact, it's very little of it. The primary matter of control is upon those in the protesters. And I leave and close my remarks by asking, a new day is Sunday, a new opportunity for, as people who have such anger and resentment and pent-up frustration with a system that I know and will acknowledge is not perfect, that has weighed heavily on communities of color, unjustly, systematically racist. As their efforts to change that system, which as a law enforcement professional, as an American, as an Angelino, as a father, I'm committed to, as well as my men and women of this organization. We join on that common ground, but let's do so with peace. Let's do so with expressions that are guaranteed that we will protect. And let's do so in a manner that does not jeopardize the lives and safety of everyone in and amongst us. Thank you.
Thank you for those great tries. Chief Terrazas.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I am tremendously proud of our firefighters and their ability to handle any crisis, whether it be the protests of the past few nights, the COVID pandemic, the dangerous fire that we fought in Skid Row a few weeks ago, or our annual brush fire threat. Whatever the reason, our firefighters will answer the bell to fulfill our mission to protect lives and property. Mayor, thank you for your leadership through these challenging times. Chief Moore, thank you for the firefighter protection that you have provided in the past and will continue to provide so that our firefighters can continue to do their jobs. And thank you to the vast majority of the public who are peacefully protesting social injustice. To those people destroying our city and blocking our firefighters so they can't answer calls for help, we have no tolerance for that type of behavior. It is wrong. Imagine you have a loved one who has suffered a heart attack or whose business was set on fire, and we can't get there in a timely fashion because you blocked us. These are consequences of your poor behavior. I ask you to be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Terrazas, and thank you as well to Chief Moore. I'll now take some questions, and then I'll give remarks in Spanish as well.
Mayor, at 3:30 yesterday, you said you didn't see the need for the National Guard, and by 7:30, you'd made the request. Can you talk about what specifically happened to cause you to change your approach?
I think it was clear to folks it escalated. I listened to what the requests are from our police officers, our chief. At 3:30, there was not seen a need for that. Things escalated as we saw. It got exacerbated. I had talked to the governor early in the morning, and I do believe that the short time period was because he offered and let us know that they could be on standby. So the mobilization was very quick, as was said. Initially, it was going to be about 7 or 8 hours, and it was there within about 4 or 5. But it was quite frankly just the escalation that we saw.
Did Chief Moore tell you that he didn't have enough officers?
At no point did he say that, no. We all would like to have, of course, we've said this many times in the city, compared to other major cities and the amount of land that we have a much lower percentage of officers. I know that there's some who call for defunding or having fewer police officers. I've always seen in departments, the more that they're underfunded, the worse things can happen. But no, we have been strong about making sure that we keep the police department strong with enough officers. And I listened every single moment to our chief and to the department and its needs, and no, that was not said.
Can you describe the conversation you had with the governor?
I've had a few conversations with the governor. The conversation I had with the governor, the last one was, we're ready. Can you send National Guard? And he said yes. And that he would declare a state of emergency at the California state level, which is what is required.
Why did, you mentioned volunteers not wanting to staff the testing centers.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the sole reason? And can you describe how the fire department and your staff are going to replace them at the...
So 100% that was the reason. I want to be clear. This was at 3 o'clock and they usually close at 5, so we just missed 2 hours of testing. But it was evidence. These volunteers were the sole reason. It wasn't a decision from City Hall. It had nothing to do with our resources, and we couldn't, keep those going for 2 more hours. Sunday's always a day off, and we will have some because I believe we have to continue testing tomorrow. So we're working out the details, finding the bodies right now, the people, making sure they're trained. And our fire department has been assisting at all of these. But know that when this kind of behavior continues, when this violence continues, pulling firefighters away from what happens in the city, and we pray that we won't see more fires set, we won't have to see the sorts of medical responses that we had last night, that taxes their ability to be able to help us with things like testing. But we are a strong city. We have a great fire department, and they will step up as well as staff from my team as well to make sure we continue that testing. It is critical in our fight against COVID-19. We have worked too hard to go backwards. And it's important for the very same things that people are on the streets protesting for, that we have justice for all communities. I'm proud that Los Angeles gives these tests free. We do them with or without symptoms. We have more African Americans, for instance, working in frontline jobs, and they need those tests for work even when they don't have symptoms. And that's part of the reason I believe we've brought those statistics down from where it was just about a month and a half ago, disproportionately killing people from our African American community and Native Hawaiian communities too.
Is the deployment of the National Guard open-ended? I know the chief spoke a bit about them being here as long as they are needed to protect the specific businesses that they're going to be stationed at, but does that mean that their deployment here is open-ended?
So I share the exact same words of our chief. We hope and pray that they won't be needed for very long, but ask me, each day. If we keep the peace tonight, if we're able to, I hope and they hope that it's a very short visit, and that essentially their work to help secure those businesses that have been broken into in downtown, Long Fairfax, that they will have helped us all save their own communities, protect our own communities, and give our neighbors a sense of reassurance.
Is that how businesses that they will be stationed at are being selected, the ones that have been broken into and vandalized already?
Yes, and in those areas. I don't know if the chief, anything else you want to add? Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. In terms of moving forward, have you and your office had conversations with leaders and activists about addressing concerns with
Absolutely.
LA policing?
Absolutely, and those aren't new conversations either. Whether it's the forums the chief has directly with African American community, with other communities of color, our LGBTQ community, there's constant dialogue, I know, between the department and those communities. I too have that, whether it's the faith community, whether it's with activists and others, and invite folks also to start those conversations around Los Angeles. I spoke last night with the community leaders, many of them, who, for instance, have called for things like establishing a Human and Civil Rights Commission in the city of Los Angeles. Thanks to their advocacy and the work of council members like Gil Cedillo and Marquise Harris-Dawson, we are establishing that commission before last night, by the way. It's been the plans for a number of months. An office of racial equity in that, so that we don't just have to give word to this, but we can actually see and measure where discrimination lives in our city. Those health indicators, the way that black women are more likely to die in childbirth, and ways that we can help all levels of government do something about it. It's not always in the city's power, but where it is, we will take those steps together. I alluded to this, and in the coming days, and maybe even some as early as today, I want to continue looking at those steps, whether it's peace centers in our community, whether it's looking at trauma-informed care, or the way we have built our gang reduction youth development programs, which are a national model. We hire folks who have been in the criminal justice system, who themselves have felt the sting of the criminal justice system, who now engage directly as the liaisons, telling the police department where they may be coming up short, creating bridges between young people in communities of color and the police department. And where we see things that are not working or that seem to discriminate, we've been taking those actions, whether it was stops in the South Bureau, which we did. I want folks to know that this is not something where Los Angeles has to be awakened. Long before I was mayor and long after I'm mayor, this is part of our culture. That said, I hope all of us take this moment not to just listen to the words of our leaders. Some aren't saying anything, and that is a yawning absence. But those who are saying good things, we have to back those up with actual actions. Are you raising a minimum wage? Are you making community college free? Are you hiring people coming out of the criminal justice system and advocating to do things like we have done, to ban the box, to hire people who have been criminally justice involved? Are you looking at the disproportionate impact of homelessness on black people, putting a report out there and then putting millions of dollars into solving that specifically as we have moved forward? Thank you to LASA and the first commission in the country and looking at the impact of homelessness on black Angelenos. These are the things that have to be part of the texture of every single day. And for a lot of people who are outraged about Minneapolis, I invite you to be a part of these ongoing things, not to paint a caricature of a department or a city, but to look deep in the progress we've made while also demanding more moving forward. Because Los Angeles has incredible successes, and like any city in America, we still have a long way to go. But those commitments, especially now, must be accelerated. We can't do that while there's burning in the street. So let's bring that peace back and simultaneously talk about the progress forward.
Do you expect, or are you planning for a spike in cases in coronavirus in 2 weeks? Do you expect to roll back any of the recent reopenings?
I certainly hope not. I don't expect it. I hope that even these gatherings don't become places, and I would ask anybody peacefully protesting, maintain safe physical distance. That is something that is required. It's under state law, not local law, for any protests. And it's also just good health advice. Don't let the folks who are most outraged about what happened, and all of us should be equally outraged, but folks that are out there on the streets shouldn't be the victims of this virus because we're not practicing safe social distancing.
There's been a lot of conversation about the tactics used by police. There were projectiles used. People were shot with projectiles. There were clashes with skirmish lines. What's your review of policing used yesterday? I know the chief mentioned that there were some strong tactics used.
I'm going to be looking at all those. I asked the chief to detail those to me. I'd like him to actually say some more about what the tactics are, because, look, in lawless situations, there's no easy ways to bring law and order back. But there have to be constitutional ways, and there have to be safe ways to do that, where we don't have loss of life simply because of the chaos around. It's a very difficult balance, but it's one that we have, unfortunately, too much experience and have learned, fortunately, good lessons about. I think the chief said it himself. We got out there, and when we were here and we were going to do a press conference together yesterday, I agreed with him, get out there and make sure you see changes on the lines, because people can't just push back or swing clubs and hope that there's going to be movement to secure cars that are on fire. At the same time, people who are protesting when there's a car on fire should not be staying there and not getting out of the way. There are better ways to do that. I saw those tactics absolutely improve, and the remarkable restraint, and I do also want to say for the officers that were out there on the line. And you can always find something where the video of one bad thing or something goes wrong, and We all have to live with the accountability of that, and I expect there to be. But the 99.99% of the good restraint that is done by officers who want to keep the peace never leads the news, never makes the headlines. But I want to praise it, thank those officers, and ask them to continue to do that. But I'll let the chief talk a little bit more about tactics.
So regarding the tactics that were used yesterday, and there was used the day before, and that we'll use today and going forward, it's proportionality. Our effort is to de-escalate. Our effort is to facilitate. Our efforts also are to protect the safety of our people, as well as the safety of the protesters, those that are present in any demonstration or gathering. What you saw yesterday and what I've seen, what I saw personally on scene, was that process work, that our training and our tools and our tactics and our restraint was above I think, certainly well above many's expectations. Many in our community I've heard, why aren't you using tear gas? Why aren't you being more forceful? Why aren't you using more force? These are individuals that should be arrested immediately. And our point of this is that we want to facilitate wherever possible, and we recognize that the demonstrators are not, or the protesters are not of all one identity. What I saw yesterday, for instance, was many individuals that were there with their grievance and their belief and their right to protest and remain. And as Mayor indicated, their belief, right to protest and remain, despite the fact that behind them were fires, behind them was ongoing dangers to public safety, and they refused, in order of an unlawful assembly, to move. And within the crowd, within the group, within this mass, individuals who took projectiles, bottles, rocks, containers, throwing them, sometimes hitting the protesters, other times striking officers, and creating a circumstance of injuries. I have an officer that is presently in the hospital with a fractured skull. He had surgery last night. I'm hopeful that I believe he will survive, but there was no guarantee when that brick struck him. That was from a group of protesters, many of which believe they were there rightfully, lawfully, and had every authority to remain despite those ongoing assaults. That is one aspect I need the leadership of every advocacy group for every social justice reform to inform, educate, inspire, and insist that when we have an unlawful assembly because of dangers, imminent dangers to people who are present, not just property damage, but the lives and safety of the participants themselves, that the state of this democracy has afforded law enforcement the authority to close that area. There are many that look at that and say, and I heard it yesterday personally, I'm not going to leave. I don't care what you do. I'm not going to leave. In the midst of that, we have missiles coming in, striking officers, injuring people within the crowd. I saw a man on Fairfax, north of 3rd, bloodied because of that type of assault. It's impossible for us to identify who's responsible because we've got a mass of 1,000 people in front of us. So people will question our tactics, they'll question our rights, and we understand that. That's what we should do. We should allow, to the point, though, of a limit. And when law enforcement, just as if this was a fire or a flood, determines the situation is unsafe, endangers the lives of people who may have absolutely no idea that they're about to die, that we have the authority and the responsibility to close that area, and the participant, the person in that group, has a responsibility to leave. And law enforcement has a responsibility when that does not happen to take action to restore order. And that's what we're trying to do in a manner that is as peaceful and as in manner of reverence for life and a manner of de-escalation as possible. But I will tell you, over the last 4 days, that has been a substantial and one of these lifetime challenges of an episode of how do we do this? And I'm proud of the work that we're going through this. Now, I will say, And I absolutely admit, as the mayor indicated, there are instances I personally witnessed. I wasn't satisfied with our response. I thought there was efforts that we could intercede. Sometimes that meant me stepping in front of a skirmish line myself and having conversations to de-escalate both our officers as well as the protesters. Many times, in fact, in nearly every instance, the protesters actually were without the authority. The protesters actually were wrong. But it was like, let me step in here and let us take and show the higher road of opportunity. That's what we're doing in the police department today versus the police department 20, 30, 40 years ago. We're not going to just put force because we have the authority. That's what we stopped, and we have continued to stop because of strong leadership and because of the desire to maintain the public's trust. But there is a member, and a significant member of the public, who look at this narrative from a prior generation, and they believe that our force should be more like what you see in other parts of this country, where you see tear gas and you see police tactics that are extremely strong. So we have individual failures? Yes. And I'll investigate each instance. And I'll hold accountable those that violate that trust and my expectation. But let's not have that, while it taints our efforts, it does not define us. Because today, to anyone who believes their rights were abused, I handed out my personal card, business card, to individuals who said, your actions are wrong. Here's my business card. We will take your complaint. I've mobilized our internal affairs. They're 24 hours a day. We will investigate any complaint of misconduct, any complaint of excessive force, any complaint of unlawful arrests. I directed some of those unlawful arrests. If you believe the chief of police arrested you, there's a young woman who was looting a 7-Eleven store along with others. And she was placed under arrest because I was the one that told her to get on the ground. She was under arrest as others were fleeing that store. If she believes that that arrest was unlawful, that I abused my authority, the Board of Police Commissioners will hold me accountable. I welcome that. I welcome that. But let's be clear. We need to change. If we're going to be successful in this dialogue, we need to change from within the stakeholders, that people who are coming to protests need to know that when we say this is an unlawful assembly and it is closed and they are to leave and here's the direction you're to travel and here's the time in which you have to comply, it doesn't matter whether they had any role in that at all. They are obligated by law to do so. And I'm obligated as responsibility to justice and to the social control to then restore order. And that means that they sit down and we will arrest them. And they are completing a civil disobedience. And I wish for us to go forward with that exercise. That's how we generally do it.
There's a lot of discussion about whether the tactics were appropriate or heavy-handed or didn't go far enough, but what were your tactics? There have been some criticism that the officers kettled a bunch of protesters right in a district that was a mall and was ripe for looting. What were the actual tactics being used to interact with the large crowds yesterday?
Okay, so I missed a word you said, something about a mall and something else?
So the police department was moving tactically across the city to contain and do what you guys do with large crowds of protesters, right?
Not to contain large crowds. So let me explain the tactics on large crowds.
Okay.
The tactics is to understand the freedom of expression, First Amendment right, and to facilitate that. In the city of Los Angeles, despite the fact that you may require a permit in which to have a demonstration, public demonstration, we generally don't require that. In fact, we typically in public areas we facilitate. What the tactics mean on that is we meet with the organizer. We ask to understand what's your nature, your intent. What are you trying to accomplish? How can we help facilitate that? Now, they may decide that, well, we intend to take Beverly and Fairfax, and we intend to sit in the middle of the intersection, and we intend to stay there for the next 3 days. And we're going to have a conversation and say, I'm sorry, you can't do that. Your rights of demonstration, while you may believe that the injustices that whatever your grievance is, that is what you should be afforded, we'll give you a reasonable period. And we will impose upon the community and the surrounding community to allow you to express and you to be heard and you to be seen. But we're going to need to move beyond that. Then, let me finish, because this is not a simple matter. Then the organizer may say, okay, give us 10, 15 minutes, and we'll facilitate that. We'll communicate to the surrounders, this is what we're doing. There may be other protesters and organizers say, we're not going to. Okay, well then we're going to have to proceed to making an arrest for you blocking the roadway. Please, if you would, let's facilitate that. Let's sit down. Does everyone want to be arrested, or is just a certain portion? And we'll facilitate that. And then we'll go in and we'll make those arrests, and that'll be that. That's typically how it works in Los Angeles, and I'm very proud of our ability to exercise that. Vast majority of the time, we never result in civil disobedience. We just facilitate. What you're seeing the last 4 or 5 days moves beyond that. They're unwilling to sit. They're unwilling to stand and even be arrested. Instead, they began aggressively throwing items, attacking officers, physically assaulting. In those instances, we will declare an unlawful assembly, and we'll order the dispersal. We'll attempt to identify those within the group and arrest them, to remove them. And if possible, if it's early enough on, we'll allow that group to continue to demonstrate just by simply removing those few individuals who are not representative. What we have gone into is a situation, though, that there's significant numbers of people in there that are facilitating those active assaults. Then that unlawful assembly doesn't get unwound. And that's what you see. The tactics then is to disperse that group. We do, at a certain point in time in the last 4 days, 3 days, seen crowds of such that simply move and then restart assaults. And then in the last 2 days, start fires and begin looting. That's where you see blocking maneuvers, where we are now going to arrest a group. We're not going to chase a group of unlawful individuals mixed with others who just want to watch or participate and express themselves. We're going to instead exercise our authority for a failure to disperse. And that's the tactics that you see.
Okay, one more, please. You talk about a lot about dialogue with protesters, how things are going to work. You know as well as I do that a lot of the actions in the last couple days have been on the fly. Protesters are moving in large groups, and the police are responding to their movements. There has to be some sort of strategy that you're utilizing to decide how you're going to maneuver around those groups, in which ways, on which streets, and in which directions, so that you can control the situation. So I'm trying to understand which tactics you use to do that.
This is probably a conversation. I'm not going to be able to satisfy your crowd control, crowd management strategies of civil protests in a back and forth in a conference such as this. If I would ask, I'm happy for us or people within my staff for us to sit down and talk about this. This is not a subject matter that takes well to snippets and so forth. And for instance, I don't know what you know and you don't know what I know. So let's not make assumptions, and let's have a conversation, sit down and go through the dialogue. My effort is, the underlying premise of this is to facilitate, to respect, and to work cooperatively for the expression. And when that doesn't work, to use proportional tactics in order to restore order. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you both for the questions as well as for the answers, Chief Moore. The one thing that I would say is these are immensely difficult, stressful situations that demand, especially when there is no central organizer of protests, that we try to dialogue with as many people. I saw officers who were talking to folks willing to talk, and I hope that we will all open up our hearts to be able to talk to one another. I saw the chief of police do that, and he mentioned that as well. At the same time, when folks are taking things at them, it is very difficult when cars are burning that have bullets in them that could explode. This is a moment in which we have to have peace, and we have to listen to orders to disperse. When that is done, I know that we can continue to have those safe and secure places to have our outrage, reach out and touch those who need to hear it. The last thing I'm going to say before I go to Spanish is just how much all of us in Los Angeles have a role in this today. We felt powerless many times with COVID-19, and we are not powerless. We have the power to change this country, to define it. We have the power to remake our city every single generation. And to the young people in particular, we hear you. We share the pain. We're committed to making sure that change isn't just a slogan, But the things that I said, and I said probably 11 or 12 of them, I'd written a bunch down of the things we've done, whether it's expanding our youth development programs by 50% in the last 7 years, whether it's making sure every child has a library card and we expand library hours, that the narrative that somehow the city is only about policing, as brave as our peace officers are, as many times as I've seen them put love and life on the line, that we all have to be held to standards, that we should all become better, but know that this is a reflection of the work that people have done collectively in this city to build a city of peace. But we have to restore a city of peace. And please help us do that tonight and the coming nights so that we can get back to the work that we need of racial justice, of economic recovery, and saving lives from the pandemic in front of us. En español yo quiero decir también unas palabras. Muy buenas tardes, Los Ángeles. Sentimos mucho dolor en nuestro país ahora. Yo también lo siento. Y como ustedes, yo también siento enojo. Sentimos rabia y la tenemos que expresar. Pero esta rabia no nos debe consumir, porque solo con paz podemos lograr progreso. No debemos permitir que personas que buscan caos y violencia se aprovechen de este momento y movimiento. Es claro que ayer vimos aliados de nuestros vecinos afroamericanos, quienes se manifestaron en varias partes de nuestra ciudad y nadie debe echarle la culpa a quienes estaban ejerciendo sus derechos a la libertad de expresión. Mientras yo sea alcalde, juntos con estos jefes, el liderazgo de esta ciudad, estamos completamente dedicados a la protección del derecho a la libertad de expresión de manera pacífica y segura. Sin embargo, anoche fuimos testigos de acciones de un número pequeño de personas en nuestras calles que no eran una manifestación pidiendo justicia. Están aprovechándose del movimiento que necesitamos ahora para pedir justicia. Mientras hay personas por todo el país sufriendo y sintiendo dolor, hay personas rompiendo vidrios, robando y golpeando. Somos mejor que esto. Esto no nos define. Y esto le ha robado la oportunidad para que negocios puedan empezar a recuperarse del impacto económico de COVID-19. Este fin de semana deberían estar abriendo de nuevo, pero ahora están cerrados porque sufrieron daños. Pronto tendré detalles sobre cómo ayudar a estos negocios y esta es una prioridad para mí. Tenemos que hacer todo lo posible para proteger a nuestra ciudad. Tengo algunas noticias para compartir que se han desarrollado en las últimas 24 horas. En toque de queda que se aplica a toda la ciudad para asegurar la seguridad de todos y permitir que nuestra policía y bomberos puedan mantener el orden. Este toque de queda se aplica esta noche también, empezando a las 8 de la noche hasta a las 5:30 de la mañana del lunes. Cuando hay emergencias, le pedimos a nuestros socios del Estado que nos asistan y hemos recibido apoyo de agencias del orden público de otras partes del Estado, Santa Bárbara, San Luis Obispo y los condados de Ventura y Kings. Y gracias por su ayuda. El gobernador Newsom también nos ofreció el apoyo de la Guardia Nacional y declaró un estado de emergencia y lo acepté. Esto no es para castigar a nadie. Quiero ser muy claro. ICE, los oficiales de inmigración, el servicio de inmigración no es un parte de estos esfuerzos y no están operando redadas. Estas personas están en el control del gobernador Newsom, no nuestro gobierno federal. Además, quisiera explicar que por necesitar a nuestros bomberos para responder a incendios en partes de la ciudad, tuvimos que cerrar nuestros sitios de prueba de COVID-19. Siempre están cerrados los domingos. Hoy es lo mismo. Pero mantendremos abierto mañana el sitio de Dodger Stadium y el centro Kedren Community Health Center en el sur de Los Ángeles, porque necesitamos luchar contra el COVID-19. Y en lugar de los voluntarios en estos centros, mi equipo, empleados de la ciudad y los bomberos estarán allí. Les sugiero a todos que se registren para hacerse una prueba gratis después de los grupos de gente de ayer. Para hacer una cita, visita la página coronavirus.lacity.org/testing. Además, hemos cerrado servicio de buses Dash y desplegamos equipos del Departamento de Transporte al Distrito Fairfax para ayudar con la respuesta a autos quemados. Y el metro suspendió servicio anoche a las 8 en la tarde porque hubo daño a autobuses de metro. Sé que algunos tuvieron problemas para trasladarse anoche y Metro mandó autobuses en toda la región para recoger a personas. Hay reembolsos disponibles para los que pueden verificar costos de transporte. El servicio regular de domingo se resumió a las 5:30 en esta mañana y servicio de Union Station, Metrolink y Amtrak siguió sin interrumpir. Además, nuestros equipos de servicios de saneamiento y servicios callejeros se han desplegado para la limpieza de nuestras calles. Su derecho de expresarse es sagrado en esta ciudad y en esta nación, tanto como su derecho a recuperar. Hoy es un nuevo día, Los Ángeles. Y en este día lo miramos de la perspectiva de nuestra juventud. El odio, la violencia no tienen que ser nuestro destino, gracias al espíritu de ellos. Este espíritu ha sido nuestra guía durante esta crisis de COVID-19 y debe ser nuestra guía ahora. No queremos violencia, queremos amor, fuerza y justicia. Cuando emprendemos estas lecciones de nuestra historia, tenemos la oportunidad de seguir trabajando juntos hacia la justicia y mejorar nuestra ciudad para ellos. Y lo hacemos por ellos cuando reclamamos la paz y la seguridad de nuestras calles. Gracias, Los Ángeles. Mucho amor y fuerza, como siempre. Thank you.